Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on all the lovely punctuation. I'm Kirsi Kekki and I'm a policy officer in Union Learn. And I can see that some of the participants have already found the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. Please keep going and keep introducing yourself and saying hello and keep the chat going throughout the webinar. It's a great way to share resources as well. So if you have anything you want to share that you come across, then please do. There will also be colleagues from Union Learn in the chat, and they will be adding some useful links and resources and publications. And I've already seen Keith at our Punctuation Day playlist there, so you can listen to that afterwards. And we also have an Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. So please feel free to add some more details and specific questions in here in there, and we'll try to get around to answering them towards the end of the webinar. And as usual, we've got our technical wizard Yusuf running things behind the scenes for today's session. And just in case, I'll apologize for any possible issues with audio visual, because of I think you know that broadband can be a bit temperamental in many cases, and as it happens, a neighbor of mine has started a DIY project this morning, so there's some extra noise on the background, and apologies for that. But anyway, if there are any techie issues, we'll try to sort them out very quickly. And there's a button on your screen that you can click to get access to the live captions for today's webinar as well, if you need them. And I think that's enough of housekeeping for today. So let's move to punctuation. So today is Union Learn's Punctuation Day, and this webinar is part of that celebration. And the Punctuation Day is a part of Union Learn's Literacy Works Week, which runs all this week. You can see it on Twitter and Facebook and on our website. And as I said, the playlist already up there, so you can go and dip into there in the Union Learn news. But into more important things, which is about today's webinar, and the kind of what we are talking about today is that why punctuation matters, how it makes easier to understand all the things we read, and why we shouldn't be scared of punctuation. And because punctuation, I mean, we're trying to make it fun as well. So, you know, if you use the ask a question button, then you can also add your favorite punctuation mark and tell us why it's your favorite. And now I'd like to introduce Rob Sanders. He's TUC's resident grammar expert and senior publications officer, and he's a linguist by training and has years of experience producing publications and campaign materials for the TUC. And he does a great job with checking copy for sense and suggesting edits and just final proofreading for typing errors, consistency, and house style. And he said that he thinks of punctuation as little signposts to make the meaning in the text clear. What he said in his email to me was that without Google Maps to steer them along, readers need your help, and punctuation does the job. So I think we can kick off with the actual topic. Now, this is to you, Rob, that I think the two of us pretty much agree that punctuation is important. But why is it so important? And what does it do? Why do we need punctuation?
Right. Hello, everybody. Really nice to be with you today. Thank you so much, Kirsi, for that introduction to the topic. I can see that you're all reporting in from wet and windy parts of the country, so I think we just have to hunker down and see what we can get through today about punctuation. So yeah, this is people sometimes laugh a bit about this, but I think this is quite a serious subject, really, because for me, punctuation is really all about, as Kirsty said, it's helping the reader to understand the meaning, really, of what you're trying to get across. You can get meanings across without punctuation, but the reader just has to work that much harder in order to understand what you're getting at. So that's really why I think it's important. I'll just share with you, actually, if you want, 2 or 3 slides that I've made, which have got 1 or 2 points on. So this is something, obviously, I can share with you later, and you can keep this, which runs through just some of those basics. So I'll just quickly do that now and share my screen. And hopefully you will be able to see what I'm getting at. So, okay, you should be seeing a kind of a PowerPoint presentation here in front of you. I'll just put it onto reading view so it's a bit easier to see. So there we are, that's me. You don't really need to know much more about that. Okay, so punctuation, what is it? I think people sometimes get a little bit worried about the difference between punctuation and grammar and syntax and all of those other complicated words that we use for how we write and how we communicate. Punctuation really is actually a series of marks or characters that are used in writing to clarify meaning. So it's not really grammar. Grammar is a bit different, really. Grammar is how you put the bits of your sentence together and the ordering of things, whereas punctuation are little signs, really. So as I'm saying here, I've got, just pointing out to you, we've got 14 or so in English. They are used to link or separate words, phrases, or clauses. They are different to grammar, and there we are, just outlining for you what they look like. So you've got the reading from left to right, if I've got this correct, we've got the full stop, the comma, the semicolon, the colon, a hyphen, an exclamation mark, a dash. Sometimes you can get 2 lengths of dashes. I'll go into that later if you want. An exclamation mark, exclamation mark, then the dash, question mark, of course, apostrophe, open quote marks, and then 3 sets of brackets. And then finally, those 3 little dots at the end, which do have a name, which we can talk about later as well if you want. So moving swiftly on then, what does punctuation do? Well, as I've indicated already, it assists the reader. It helps, it adds little signposts to help them understand your writing better. So I'm just quoting here someone called Lynn Truss, who I'm sure you'll have probably come, well, not, you might not have come across her, but she wrote a very famous book called Eats, Shoots and Leaves, employing the use of a comma and to indicate that actually without that comma, meaning can change. And so, and she wrote a whole book about punctuation, which is actually very funny. If you are a punctuation, if you're interested in it, then do read the book if you haven't already, because it is a fun read as well. So, and I often think that really punctuation it's almost a function of, it's really related to how a sentence, how you pause when you're reading a sentence. And really, so that's the same as almost how you pause when you're perhaps saying it out loud. So one thing I find quite useful is that when you're writing, if you do read your sentences aloud or just in your head, as that little voice in your head tends to do anyway, then where you would naturally pause or change your tone, you probably do need punctuation. And I think everyone's familiar with the notion of a comma, at least, really just adding a little bit of a pause or a breath. So, and onto something really rather important, which Kirsty did ask me about, which is like, why does it matter? Why do we get so hung up about it? Or why do some people get hung up about it? I think it's important because, if you think about us in our role as trade unionists, we're often, as reps in particular, you're trying to help your members. You're trying to get information across to them. It might be a guidance or advice. You're probably negotiating on their behalf with your employer, and having clarity over what you're saying, what you're asking for, particularly providing clarity to your readers, is, I think, absolutely vital, isn't it, really? And if you don't do that and you leave things unpunctuated, then you are simply causing a whole bunch of problems for them. So, and I give you 2 examples on this slide here. We've got this long sentence, which I think a colleague, Callum, sent in before this started as an example of really how not to do it, because you've got this incredibly long sentence with no pauses or gaps obviously in it. And where does one clause start and another finish? What's the actual meaning? Very hard to divine it. And of course, there's an example below that as well about how punctuation removes ambiguity. If you compare these two little sentences, I'm sorry, I love you, with I'm sorry, I love you, clearly you have a rather different meaning. So that's my sort of little introductory homily, if you like, and I can proceed and talk to you about some of the more common ones and how they're used. Is that a good idea, Kirsty?
Yes, please. I'm not sure. Am I? Yeah, that would be great. And you've got those brackets there. Have they all different names? Because that's a difficult one for me. That they kind of, as English is not my first language, to know what everything is called. So there's the brackets, and what are the two other brackets?
Yeah, good question. Well, technically, the thing that we would most commonly call brackets are the ones that you see, first of all, the curved ones, like a sort of convex and concave pair. Those we often refer to them as brackets, but actually, technically, they're called parentheses. And the ones that look more square are literally called just square brackets, as far as I know. And the curly ones, I don't know what they're called. So if anyone wants to put in the chat, if they know if there's a name for those, that would be good. You see them much less frequently. They tend to be used in mathematical formulas and things. You wouldn't necessarily try and put them into your ordinary typed or written communications. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers that. It is quite important, I think, to know the names of these things, because if you don't name them and people don't understand what you mean by it when you say, oh, that little curly thing that sits above the line, well, why not give it its name,
Yeah, that makes sense. And I must say that those curly things, I don't think I've ever used for anything. Maybe, as you say, at school for maths, but yeah, maybe someone will find the name for them as well. But can you take a look into some of the more common punctuation questions and kind of things that you would pick up as important for everyone to kind of talk on to?
Okay, sure. Yeah, will do. Not a problem. Let me just scroll through then to some punctuation marks in action. So, okay, well, we can start with the comma, which I think is, it's obviously the most common thing that people use, but it's relatively easy to misuse it, and it can be quite a problem if you put it in the wrong place. So, for example, I give you a few examples here on the slide of what you might do with it. So, let's eat grandma is not quite the same as let's eat grandma. Okay, that's a pretty clear one. So then you can also use it to separate out two clauses. So we've got what you might call an independent clause and a dependent clause here together. I don't need to really go into these terms, but the "we can all go for a beer" is the bit that is the independent clause, because if you didn't have the bit in front of it, then it's a sentence in its own right. But you're going to start off instead with a conjunction, and you're going to say, if I do da 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 da, we could all go for a beer. So I would put a comma after wallet there, because particularly if it's a relatively long sequence of words, because it just gives you that bit of breath. Again, if you say it out loud, if I can find my wallet, yay, we can go for a beer. There's a natural pause in there anyway. So the comma helps to achieve that for you and for the reader. Now, I've mentioned, fronted adverbials. Goodness knows what people are thinking when they read this. This was actually controversial recently because it came up in some news items about school kids being taught about fronted adverbials, and was it important that they were or not. Anyway, a fronted adverbial is simply something like, earlier today, I wrote this. It's an adverb phrase describing when you did the writing. You did it earlier today. So if you start off by putting earlier today at the front, and no reason why you shouldn't, put the comma in. Obviously, if you turn that around the other way and you said, I wrote this earlier today, you wouldn't put a comma after this. I hope that makes sense, because I wrote this earlier today. You could put a comma in. You could say, I wrote this, comma, earlier today, but you'd be kind of implying then that you wanted to add something else afterwards. So anyway, I won't go on about this because I might be complicating things, but lists. Okay, really important to put your commas in if you're listing things. I love my parents, my partner, my union, and my dog. Great. Okay, put the commas in, because otherwise, if you didn't, you just have a long sequence of words. Then you get the controversial, do you put a comma before and at the end of a list? Well, here's an example of what can happen when you do put it in and when you don't. So I love my parents, Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty. Right. So are you really saying that your parents are Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty? But if you put a comma in before the and, it just indicates to the reader that little bit of extra pause. So I love my parents, Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty. Yeah, so it just helps the reader get there, I think. And also, in terms of commas reducing ambiguity, here's a picture of me holding my daughter and the Queen is different really from here's a picture of me holding my daughter and the Queen, because you're thinking, oh, is he really holding his daughter and the Queen at the same time? How is that remotely possible? So there we are, the humble comma. Semicolons, ooh, okay. I like them. I think they're quite good for connecting clauses where the second clause complements the first. So I've got some examples here. Good news, the union has been recognized. It just adds a little bit more of a pause than the comma, and it allows you to explain why this is good news. You could put a full stop there. You could say good news, full stop. The union has been recognized. But it's a bit staccato, and good news, of course, isn't necessarily a sentence. So, yeah, you know, it's moot point. But I think semicolons are good to avoid that staccato effect sometimes. Here's another example. The building had gone. In its place stood a new block of flats. Where you've got two clauses that aren't connected, you wouldn't put a semicolon in, you just put a full stop. So Claire is a poet working on her 4th collection, full stop. She is passionate about mental health. 2 separate issues, 2 separate sentences, why not? Semicolons can be great for removing ambiguity in lists. So if you commaed all of these words off in between each other in this sentence that I'm showing you here, Oakham, Leicestershire, you would you'd cause confusion in people's minds. But if by putting them in, putting a semicolon in after each major set of words, you get less confusion. So we've lived in Oakham, Leicestershire, bit of a pause, Boston, Massachusetts, and Nashville, Tennessee. So the colon is more emphatic. So a bit like semicolons, but they're bigger brother, bigger sister. 2 dots for a start instead of a comma and a dot. So they're more emphatic and they demand a longer pause. So they can herald starts of lists. And this is where you really are stating something. You know, my reasons are, I don't like dogs, I don't like cats, so you put a colon there at the beginning of the list. A direct quote. You'd see this frequently, obviously, in novels, books, literature, writing, journalism. Someone's being quoted. She said, colon, open quotation marks, off you go. You could actually have a comma instead of a colon there after the said. That literally doesn't matter which you use, but a colon can be good for something that sounds quite emphatic. I put them in when I'm separating out the titles and subtitles of publications, that when I'm quoting the name of a publication. So the main title is Flexible Working. The colon does a little bit of a job of then separating out the subtitle. So you could put a dash there, you could do other things, but I think a colon does that best. and like semicolons, they can connect complementary clauses, but they add just a bit more power. So you're saying, I don't like cats. Here's the reason. I'm allergic to them. Again, you could put a full stop, but I think the colon does that nice bit of heralding. It's like, I'm going to say something now. Kirsty, shall I move on to the awesome apostrophe, or have I spoken too much for the moment? I'm quite happy to carry on if you'd like.
Let's go to apostrophe in a minute. I wanted to say that there seems to be a lot of love for semicolon in the chat. But it was one of the questions that came up in beforehand. Someone asked me that, what is the point of semicolon? And I thought that, well, actually, I can't remember if I've ever used the semicolon for anything. That it's kind of more difficult than I do. Kind of get the colon point really well, but the semicolon is kind of a bit more difficult. So I think that's probably something that a lot of people find kind of either using it. I think I mentioned it to you that I thought it was posh using a semicolon.
Yeah, I don't know if it's posh. It might be associated with people who write in inverted commas literature, literary novels, more academic writing. Yes, I think academics and literary writers tend to use it more. Whether that's because they are really, really interested in language and they're really interested in the nuancing of language, and they think that a semicolon adds that little bit of nuance, which personally I do think it does. But as I say, I don't think it's something to get really hung up about. It's particularly if you're communicating something to people quickly and you're campaigning, you're in campaign mode, you're in activist mode, you're getting some stuff out, you want to get across some points really quickly, you want to get meaning across fast, and you want to do it in that kind of Daily Mirror style that we often advocate that trade unions should be doing, then actually reducing your adherence to semicolons is probably a good idea, because they can complicate things and they can look a little bit, you might use them in longer sentences, and then your sentences are getting a bit long and you're thinking, and the reader's struggling a bit. So I would use them carefully and not sprinkle them everywhere. But as I say, personally, I do like them. It looks like the chat, as you say, is suggesting that people are really liking it. So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I seem to be a minority now. But going back to your slides, there's also a couple of questions in the ask a question box about. Someone asks about how do you feel about Oxford comma, and someone else says that I was always taught that in the case of and, you should use and not a comma. So I suppose they go a bit together with that. But like, what do we feel about adding those commas when we use that list and?
Yeah, let's go back to that comma page here. I mean, obviously, one slide doesn't cover all the different uses of the comma. The Oxford comma technically is that thing that you put it in before the and a lot of people in English, when they're writing, they don't put one in. On the other hand, the Americans love it. I think I'm right in saying this, but do correct me, somebody, if I'm wrong. But I think that by and large, they do tend to use the comma before and. I think actually you need to be flexible about it. The Guardian style guide, for example, which is quite interesting to look at every now and again, that says, look, actually just use your discretion. If the comma adds that little bit of extra pause and just makes it clearer that that very last item in the list is maybe something slightly different to the ones that you've mentioned before, or it just has a slightly different meaning attached to it, then put the comma in, because A, it does no harm, and B, it just indicates to the reader that you just shifted slightly onto something that's slightly different in the list. And as I say, if you don't put it in certain circumstances, like after Lady Gaga, then the comma after the parents is leading you into saying potentially what comes next are my parents. Whereas if you put the comma in after gaga and before the and, then you'll make it very clear that that is not the case. So I think say it in your head if you're thinking about putting one in, and if it feels right to just add that bit of extra pause and it clarifies the meaning, then yes, please do it. I think otherwise I would suggest there's some great places to go to if you're really interested in this kind of thing. I mean, there's loads and loads of online stuff about punctuation. And I know, Kirsty, you're going to be putting some information in the notes later, but we've got, there's a thing called Grammarly, which I really like. If you go to Grammarly blog, Grammarly, you can sign up to having it to use free on your, when you're working in browsers and you're writing emails and things. It works if you're using Gmail, it works if you're using the web browser version of Outlook. It's a little helping hand. It's called Grammarly, and it's a bit like, sorry, I'm going off topic here, but it's a bit like the autocorrect that Microsoft offers you, but instead of only picking up just spelling mistakes, it also picks up little grammatical little punctuation things. So it says, would you like to put a comma in here? And you go, oh yeah, of course I do. I should have done, and it's great on that kind of thing. So Grammarly, and yeah, there's a whole bunch of other other ones. There's a website called What Are the 14 Punctuation Marks in English Grammar that runs through a lot of this kind of thing that I'm talking about today as well. So I can provide a link to that as well later if people want.
Yeah, I think it's useful to have a lot of resource that people can check up afterwards as well. And I can say that there's a lot of views about Oxford comma. I do like it. Andre saying that I'm an Oxford commarist, and someone else says that commas should not be used before and. So I think this is a kind of contentious issue all around, but I think we explained it really well why it is useful at times.
At times, yes, that's right. Yeah.
I think that's it. Before we go to apostrophe, because apostrophes are my favorites, definitely yes. My favorite punctuation mark. And before we go there, there's a question about, actually, I'm not sure if this is exactly punctuation, but it is about full stop, because someone's asking that, or saying that I was brought up that you don't use and after a full stop, but this doesn't seem to be the case anymore. When I asked my son's teacher, they didn't know why it had changed. But I think this must be more of a style question rather than punctuation as such, that why couldn't you just use any word after a full stop?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I was brought up as well that you put in your full stop, you start your new sentence with a capital letter, and it's got to be the beginning of a new sentence, and you can't start it with a conjunction because a conjunction like and or but is, well, it was deemed to be, in my day when I was being taught these things, it was deemed to be just bad English, really, and you just didn't do it. But things like before, although, during, while, when, these are all conjunctions, in the broadest sense of the word. So, and you would certainly start a sentence with although I da, or while I, etc., etc., etc. So why shouldn't you start one with but or and? Although and technically is more of a connecting conjunction rather than a conjunction that you would put at the beginning of a sentence. However, so anyway, let's boil this down then. I think what you can do, and what the TUC's own style guide advises you to do, is to freely start a sentence with and, but you would do it much more if you are trying to get across some punchy messaging, maybe in some copy on a leaflet, say, where you want people to take some actions. You want to get down some reasonably staccato kind of pieces of information, a nice call to action at the end or as well in the middle. And if you've got a couple of sentences in there that use and, that actually help you build momentum as you're building your argument, in the classic sense of first you can do this and then you can do that and then you can do that. that helps, and I don't think there's anything wrong at all in doing that. Where you might want to be a bit more careful is if you are writing a technical, academic-y, very kind of more formal application, say for some funding or whatever, and you think your audience is going to be of a more traditional nature, and they're going to, they might find it a little bit too casual on your part if you did that. But it's TC thinks it's fine, so there you are.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I think that's another one that we can debate longer. But let's move to apostrophes, because as I said, it is my favorite, and some of you might know that Finnish is my first language, and we rarely use apostrophes. But I think it's really easy to use, but it seems that it's quite difficult for a lot of people. And we did get a question in beforehand about this as well, that how, like kind of what's the basics, the rule, that and obviously the meanings change depending on how you use it.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. It's great. I love talking about apostrophes because they're just really, really useful things if you can get the hang of them. And you do have to get the hang of them. So it does mean you have to do a little bit of thinking about it. But once you've got the relatively small number of rules in your head, it should be okay. And so I don't know. I hope you can still see my presentation here. So I've moved on to a page called the Awesome Apostrophe, and I'll try and just quickly explain. Again, obviously you can see this later because I can make this available, but I'll just run through what it does. Okay, so the first function of the apostrophe is, and we're all very familiar with this. If you've got a few missing letters, the apostrophe goes into the place where those letters are missing, and these are typically in contractions like I've seen, she wasn't, we didn't, they would have, all of the things like that. So the apostrophe shows you that in the case of I've, the H and the A are missing, and in the case of the wasn't, the O is missing from was not, and I have. So, and I think most people are familiar with those and don't struggle with them too much. The difficult one is the possessive, this notion of something owning or belonging to something. So here's a great one. I literally know a friend of mine actually saw this on a sign, and that's where we often see our apostrophes and think, oh, is that right? Is that not right? So tenants refuse. No, tenants. Well, I'm going to get it. This is why it's ambiguous. Tenants refuse to go in bins. Well, no, surely not. But if you put the apostrophe in, then it shows you that the word after tenants is belonging to the tenants. The tenants are owning something. If you put an apostrophe in after that S, it does two things. It says, A, we're talking about multiple tenants here, not just a single one. And B, whatever comes after this is going to belong to the tenants. So you can't then imagine that it's a verb, because it's going to have to be it's going to have to be a noun probably. So that changes the way that you look at the word refuse, and instead of refuse, it becomes refuse. So this is all quite interesting stuff. It's like the eat, shoots and leaves thing again, because leaves then has two meanings, doesn't it? Depending on where you put when you put the comma in one way, leaves are the leaves that pandas eat, whereas if you don't, then the leaves could mean the verb, to leave. So here we are. So I think that's a really interesting example of where an apostrophe really helps to make your meaning clear. And of course, what the sign actually had on it was tenants refused to go in bins because they didn't put the apostrophe in, and they should have done. Right. So then we get to the important thing about, well, where exactly do you put it? Well, I've already mentioned the fact that if you put it in before the S, then it's a singular. You're talking about one patient here in the example that I give. If you put it after the S, it means you're talking about multiple patients. So you could have an incredibly complicated sentence like the butcher's dog's bones marrow tasted great to the dogs, of course. And you've got butchers with an S, you've got dogs with an S, you've got bones with an S, and you could make up a million different, well, probably about 36 different permutations of, depending on whether you were talking about one butcher, one dog, one bone, or several butchers, but only one dog, because the dog could be owned by all of the butchers. So it all gets very complicated. So you need to put your apostrophe in the right place whenever you have those things. And so, and I think this is why we see so many of what we've been talking about, what people refer to as the grocer's apostrophe, because I think people have got so worried about the fact that whenever they see an S on the end of a word, they think, I mean, it's actually just a plural, but they think, oh, it's got an S on the end. That means probably there ought to be an apostrophe around there somewhere. And I don't know whether to put it in or not. And I don't know whether to put it in front of the S or after the S. But because I've heard so much stuff about this blooming apostrophe, I'm going to put it in anyway. And then they do. But actually, they put it into a word that is just a plural of a noun. Mm-hmm. Buy more bananas at Bert's stall. You wouldn't put an apostrophe anywhere near the bananas because they're bananas. It's just a plural form of banana. But people put it in because they think, help, I've seen an S. I think I need to put an apostrophe in somewhere. I think that's the mental process that people are going through anyway. Be interested to hear what other people have to say about that. It's is the one that does confuse people. It's with an apostrophe or it's without an apostrophe. So the rule on that one is it's, if it has an apostrophe in it, so IT apostrophe S, it always means it is or it has. It never ever means anything else than that. So if you want to say, in my example here, good food at its best, you don't put the apostrophe in, because if you did, the reader would think it's got to mean it is or it has. And the sentence, good food it is, or good food it has best, doesn't make sense. Sorry, I'm probably beginning to shout now. Apostrophes make me shout. So sorry if that's the case, but I hope that makes it clear. So just take that little moment's pause to think about the comma when you're doing it's, because it's the one, and that is one that does trip people up. It trips me up actually all the time, even though I've been writing it's for 62 years. No, that's not true. When did I start writing? Less than that. I'm giving away my age now. Right. Shall we talk about more things?
Yeah, I think that I put the apostrophe to it's pretty much always to start with, and then I go back and take it away. It's possessive. So it kind of, there is that kind of, I don't know, sort of automatic thing that, in me at least, that wants to drop it in. But
yes.
I do see a lot of that in quite kind of formal text, even, where it kind of slides when sometimes it is there and sometimes it isn't. But I think you're right that you just have to keep an eye on it and go back to that and say that, well, actually, is it someone owns something, or is it something describes something? That is a good way to kind of think about it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. No, totally agree. And don't, as I say, don't be afraid. Just take that moment, thought, and if you're not sure, ask someone if you want. I mean, why not? I mean, you may find it useful if you're working with colleagues. I mean, it's more difficult, of course, this year when we're all working in our little bubbles and are, isolated from colleagues. But just running things quickly past someone who might be a punctuation fan, if you're not sure, why not? Just do it. Have a punctuation champion in your office when we all go back to our offices, or become one yourself. Because it doesn't take long to quickly make that decision and to get it right. But please don't worry about it. I mean, authors, you talk to book publishers about famous authors and well-known journalists as well. You talk to sub-editors working on newspapers, and the kind of stuff that even the best-known writers struggle with, a lot of it is actually in this kind of area. So don't feel intimidated or upset or worried if you think you're not quite getting the hang of it, because you're not alone. There is lots of guidance out there online. We're recording this anyway, so hopefully you'll get a chance to dip back into that. So yeah, as I say, don't be too dismayed, don't be put off. Yeah, and I think good editors and good proofreaders will obviously pick this kind of thing up, because that's what their job is. I mean, they're literally scrutinizing every word, so I think there's a good role for people like that. But I think if everyone can take a little bit more responsibility for their own writing in that respect, obviously that's great, particularly if you don't have a colleague you can share something with.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think it's a great idea to have someone who loves punctuation, grammar, or is interested to kind of help others and share it. That works really well with the whole kind of union learning concept. I was going to say, like, can we have a quick few words about the inverted commas and quotation marks, now that the apostrophes already kind of hang there on top of the text? Because that was one of the questions that came up earlier as well. We've got a couple of minutes, so kind of like a quick introduction and see what we can learn about them.
Absolutely. Okay. Yep. Not a problem. Let's see if I can scroll to. I have got a slide on this, I think. We've got hyphens and dashes there if people are interested. So quote marks. Yes, that's what you were interested in, was it, Kirsty? The single and double quote marks and things. I've called them cute quotes, but that's just because I'm trying to give a nice name to each of my slides. So punctuation marks, yes, these particular ones, you can get the double version or the single version. We've all seen them around people's quotes, so they are often called quote marks. I think at school, when I learned about these, people talked about inverted commas. I don't know if other people have come across that term.
Yeah.
Because that's actually what they are in a sense. They've been turned upside down and raised to the top of the line rather than was a phrase I always used to know. So now this is a bit of a house style question. If you go to different countries, if you go English-speaking countries, if you go to different organizations within those countries, if you go to different publishing houses where that might have a house style, then you'll find that actually they set their own rules about this. The TUC's rules generally, and this is something I think that is shared by a lot of places, but certainly not by all, is that if you're reporting some speech that someone's actually said, or it could be text that's actually been written and you're quoting the actual words, then our style is to put double quote marks around the quoted material, not single ones. As I say, there are some organizations who just only will use single ones. And if you look at novels, if you love reading novels, you'll find obviously lots of conversations in novels all the time. How do publishing houses denote conversations going on? Sometimes they will actually just use single ones, maybe because relentless use of double ones uses up more space. They'd have to print more pages. Well, I mean, no, that may actually be true. But but anyway, our style is always double quotes for quoted material. So I've given you two examples here. Frances said, "I will fight for decency." That's what she's saying, what she said. Put the quote marks around that. The second example, the Act. So I'm quoting something that the, I don't know, Trade Union Act 1996 or whatever refers to workers and to employees. Now, I would actually put quote marks around workers and employees. If I'm going to go on and explain something about the difference between the two, then I'll put double quotes around those, because those phrases, those words were actually used in the Act and are an important point. Are an important part of what the Act is trying to tell you about, i.e. the difference between workers and employees under employment law, for example. Here's another example. I think I read this online a few days ago before the whole Meghan thing came out as the program that we all, or maybe not all of us, watched the other night. I only saw a bit of it. In the interview, Meghan will talk about how she's handling intense public pressure. Well, if she actually used those words in the interview, then yes, put quote marks around intense public pressure, because you're quoting her. If you're reporting very generally that she is going to talk about what it's like to handle intense public pressure, then of course you don't need them. But here you're actually quoting what she said. Single inverted commas or single quote marks are, for me at least, and I think for the TUC is what we talk about in our House Star Guide, is a little bit of a sense of known as or so-called, as I've literally done it just there. And for that reason, they're sometimes called scare quotes, because they imply that the author is putting a little bit of distance between the writing and themselves. A little bit of irony, a little bit of distance, a little bit of, some people say, I'm not necessarily going to say this, but I'm telling you what other people might say. That's when you might do the, the quote marks. That's when people sometimes put their fingers in the air and go, So I would use single quote marks for that. And you'd have to use single ones. If you start off a sentence with quoting a conversation or quoting something, in this case, I saw Marcia at work and she said to me, blah, blah, blah. So you're quoting that this happened. So you start off with doubles. But if you've then got something that someone said as part, within that quotation, you have to show a difference between the ones you've started to use and then the ones inside. So you'd switch to the single ones inside and then finish off with the double quote mark after the word her. I hope that's reasonably clear. I'm not sure whether I've covered all of the use of quote marks, but those are certainly the main ones.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Those are the kind of
the
ones people come across most. So that's very helpful. I think we are kind of getting close to the end, and I see in the chat that there's a lot of love to hear more about hyphens and dashes, but maybe that people can kind of dip into that in the slides when they get them with on the website with the recording of this webinar. So I think to kind of close things off, have you got a favorite punctuation mark, or have you got some words of wisdom you want to tell us all about how to live with our punctuation?
How to live with our punctuation, yeah. Gosh, that's a difficult one. I'm actually a bit obsessed by dashes. I use them a lot, and I don't think I should, actually, to be honest, but I do like them. I use them with a space on either side as a kind of an interjection. So when I'm writing something and I just want to stick something in and go, I think I've got an example on the slide. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah. On this slide, I talk in the bottom right-hand corner here, I talk about the dash. Of course, we'll sign the agreement. Boom, as long as it's in our favor. It just adds a little bit of more power. Again, I talked about power in the use of the colon, and I think a dash does a similar thing. And I quite often I use dashes to separate out a little clause in the middle of a sentence somewhere. So in other words, it could carry on with, of course, we'll sign the agreement as long as it's in our favor, dash, and we will do the signing on Friday. So you might finish off with something afterwards, and you'd use a dash on either side of the bit in the middle just to separate it out. I think technically you shouldn't really do that very often, though. I think purists would say that overuse of dashes in that way is not right. What I would say, though, is if you use them, please make sure that you use a dash and not just a hyphen. And there are technically, for those of you who are interested in these things, typographers make a difference between an N dash and an M dash. And an N is a slightly longer hyphen, whereas an M is a really long hyphen. I mean, it's like almost 3 times the length of a hyphen. And those are 2 types of dashes. Whatever you do, if you can, please use a dash though, rather than just a hyphen. If you are using your laptop, if you're using your computer at work, a PC, and you're using a standard keyboard, you can find a dash by pressing the Control key and the minus key on the numeric keypad at the same time, and that gives you a proper dash. Or you can find a dash by looking in the symbols menu on your in Word, or you can actually even find a dash in amongst all of your emojis and emoticons and things. You can hit the Windows key and the full stop button at the same time, and all your emoticons and things come up. And there is actually an area where you can find things like copyright marks, trademark signs, weird and wonderful typographical signs, and amongst there are dashes and things. So you can grab a dash and paste that in. But don't use a hyphen, and whatever you do, don't use an unspaced hyphen. In other words, in my example, we'll sign the agreement. If you then put a hyphen between agreement and as, in an attempt to put in a dash, obviously that's really confusing. So, yeah. So anyway, I do like dashes, but I shouldn't as much as I do. And okay, so my last word then would be, I think, to just try and be comfortable with punctuation. It's a great thing to become comfortable with. It really does help. It really helps your readers, and those are the people that are the most important things. I mean, we're writing not to impress ourselves. We're writing because we are trying to get across as clearly as we possibly can and as quickly as we can some meaning to people who really need it. I mean, particularly if they're in a difficult situation at work, you can't be faffing around leaving confusion in their minds as to what you're trying to get across. So think about it that way. Really, it's for others' benefit, not really for your own. And yeah, so if you can become comfortable with it, it's a great thing. So
great.
That would be my closing thought.
Thank you very much. I love it that you're so enthusiastic and passionate about punctuation, because I love it too. And it seems that on the chat that there's a lot of people who think that this is worth talking about. So big thanks to you, Rob, for taking the time to discuss punctuation, and big thanks to everybody who's been listening and contributing questions and things in the chat. And yeah, I think we all will be writing better, hopefully, in the future after this. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for all those lovely comments in the chat. Brilliant. Lots of lovely, good, really interesting stuff in there. Yeah. Sorry we couldn't cover all the topics.